So perhaps you can begin explaining us how the interpretation mode functions. Thank you, Sol.
Perfect. Hello, today's session will have interpretation services. To select your preferred language, please go to the toolbar at the bottom, select the icon that reads interpretation, and then you will be able to choose your preferred language, either English or Spanish. Hola, ¿qué tal? La sesión del día de hoy cuenta con servicio de traducción. Para seleccionar su idioma de preferencia, ir a la barra de herramientas en el margen inferior, seleccionan el icono en forma de globo terráqueo que dice interpretación y luego podrán seleccionar su idioma de preferencia, tanto inglés como español. Muchas gracias. Thank you.
Bueno, buenos días, buenas tardes.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, depending on the area where you are at. I would like to welcome all of you to this seminar and to take a look as to how the QSTF works. And for those of you who do not know me, I am Elizabeth Ferreira, and I work in the National Metrology Institute for Uruguay in LATU, and I am a delegate by LATU in the QSTF. And to this day, I am the president of the task force group number 12, MWG 12. And first of all, I would like to thank all of you for accepting our invitation. This seminar has been organized between QSTF and the metrology group, work number 12, and also with the support of the secretary from SIM, Claudia Santos. When we started to organize this seminar, after receiving this requirement in the meeting that we had in Colombia last year, we thought about mainly presenting it to the delegates and to the members of the metrology group number 12. But also, since we started to organize it, we thought that it was a very good opportunity to share it with other colleagues from SIM and also from colleagues from outside of this region. And well, we are very proud of the work that we did, and I believe that it might be something very interesting for everyone. Well, we have organized this seminar in 3 sessions. The first session, we are going to talk about exactly the role that the QSTF has within SIM and also within the framework of the corporate agreement that we have, SIM, and we are going to be discussing also about the documentation and how we work for the documents that are specific for these. Afterwards, we're going to have a 15-minute break. And during this first session is going to be presented by Sally Bruce. She is the president of the QSTF, and by Isabella Men, who is the vice chair of the QSTF. And after this first break, we are going to go to the second session. And this is a session that is going to be presented once again by Sally Bruce and by Milena Rodriguez, who is a delegate for the QSTF by the National Metrology Institute of Colombia. During this session, we are going to be dealing with the role of the responsibilities that the delegates have in the QSTF and also how the delegates are prepared in order to be able to evaluate the information that is sent both by the National Metrology Institutes or by the appointed institutes that present their information systems for approval. Then we have another 15-minute break, and we will go to session number 3, which is going to be in charge by Fernando Combit, who is a delegate in the QSTF by Argentina, and by Angie Kong, which is the Andrew also, who is the secretary. In this session, we are going to speak about how all the information must be presented, both by the appointed institutes or the national metrology institutes that want that their management systems to be approved, and how to present it both for the QSTF meeting and when they need to upload this information. And at last, Andrew is going to be talking about the use or how we can correctly use the SharePoint for SIM in order to be able to handle or manage this documentation. Finally, we are going to have a session, a Q&A, of just a general Q&A. But before we start with each one of the sessions, I would like to make a few comments about how the platform will work while we are going to be in our meeting. It is important that you know that all the questions and comments that you would like to make and that are answered during this event, they need to be completed in the field in the Q&A field that you can find generally in the lower part of your screen. The use of the chat is more destined to things that have to do, for example, I have an audio problem or there is something that is not working. After each presentation, Andrew, in the English part, and I will do it in Spanish, but we are going to be verifying which are the things that were written in this field, and these will be answered in the final minutes, which are destined for each one of the presenters or the speakers. If there are questions or things that might not be answered at the moment, then we are going to go to take this question to the end, or some time that might be left in the end. But if we do not have enough time to answer them all, they might be answered via email, or if there are too many, we'll see it's no more adequate to do it in writing in the website. Well, now we are going to start with our seminar. I'm going to open the floor for Sandy. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Sally Bruce, the chair of the SIM Quality System Task Force, and I'm going to give an overview of the role of SIM, QSTF as the body within SIM. First, I want to start with some acronyms and abbreviations. I don't expect you to memorize all of these, but we are recording the presentation and you can look at these later. But each time these occur, I'm going to try to say them out, especially for the first time. But I will be using these abbreviations pretty frequently within my presentation. Back in October of 1999, the directors of National Metrology Institutes of the 38 member states of the original Meter Convention signed a mutual recognition arrangement for the national measurement standards and calibration measurement certificates issued by the National Metrology Institutes. The Joint Committee of the regional bodies, regional metrology organizations and the BIPM, which implement this MRA, set the deadline of December 31st, 2004 for the MRA signatories to have their quality systems established, reviewed, and approved in order to support the original claimed calibration and measurement capabilities that were in the original database, the KCDB. And they also set a deadline of 2006 for the reference material capabilities. So I just want to say that this is our 20th year of convening an internationally demonstrating that we have quality systems that are implemented. So the CIPM-MRA was established for these reasons: to establish the degree of equivalence of the national measurement standards that are maintained by the National Metrology Institutes and the designated institutes, to provide for the mutual recognition of calibration and measurement certificates that are issued by the institutes. And it provides governments and other parties with a secure technical foundation for wider agreements related to international trade, commerce, and regulatory affairs. And there's assurance that measurements that are traceable through these different institutes can be accepted across borders. The technical basis and confidence in the measurements are built with these underpinnings through the international comparisons and measurements known as key comparisons, supplementary international comparisons of measurements, and quality systems are the demonstrations of the competence. And the outcome is these statements of calibration and measurement capabilities, CMCs, of each of the institutes are in a publicly available database made by the BIPM. So I've added the hyperlink here and also a QR code. And the assurance is that all the data that's in the database have been reviewed and approved within the processes of the CIPM-MRA arrangement. And in fact, we have regional metrology organizations for AFRIMETS, the African nations, the Asia Pacific Metrology Program, Asia Pacific areas, CUMET for the Russian Federation and additional areas, EUROMET for European areas, and GulfMet for the Gulf region, and SIM for the Americas. The CIPM-MRA has grown a good deal since 1999, when in fact now it's been signed by the representatives of 250 institutes, 64 member states, 36 associates of the CGPM, and 4 international organizations. And it further covers 149 institutes that are designated by the signatory bodies. And how does one obtain this international recognition and approval of the measurement capabilities? The first step is the signing of the MRA. An implementation of the quality management system would likely come very quickly, either before or after that signing. The successful participation and outcome of intercomparisons and undergoing assessments or peer reviews of the quality management system. And then the final step would be the review and approval of the quality management system by the regional metrology organizations' quality committees. And I should mention that those regions that I had shown you before on that globe map represent the regional metrology organizations, and each of them have quality committees or quality task force, very similar to what we do in SIM. So for the Quality System Task Force at SIM, then delegated the responsibility in the CIPM-MRA for the review of the quality management systems. And this responsibility has been assigned by the SIM Council to the SIM Quality System Task Force. And this is documented in a SIM 09 document. The quality management system approval by the Quality System Task Force of SIM is required to support the CMC claims. However, since it's not limited to this purpose, any NMI or DI in the SIM region may present their quality management system related to their measurement services for the QSTF approval. So within the SIM 09, the sections regarding the rules of order for the Quality System Task Force of SIM. So there was a SIM resolution back in 2005 regarding the task force being set up to review the quality system implementations in SIM members for the purpose of the CIPM-MRA, which will be formed by the CIPM-MRA signatories, and the chairperson of the QSTF is appointed by the Council of SIM. In the SIM bylaws state the responsibilities and membership of SIM QSTF are that the meetings are open to all SIM members and observers and provide an opportunity for discussion and comments. The QSTF decisions are made by representatives of the SIM signatories to the CIPM-MRA. The QSTF assesses whether or not the quality system conforms with the requirements of the CIPM-MRA. And under that would be the ISO IEC 17025 for calibration and testing services, and or the 17034, the ISO standard for the certified reference material production. SIM QSTF approval is required now prior for the submission of the CMC claims to the Joint Committee of the Regional Bodies. Quality systems that are approved must be fully reevaluated and reapproved within 5 years. Reports to the Joint Committee of the Regional Bodies is done annually, and there's a summarization of any changes that would affect the delivery of the CMCs. A quorum of the QSTF is needed, and it's a 50%. Resolutions are then made by simple majority. On the BIPM website, both of these documents are available. On the left is the front page cover of a document called CIPM-MRA G12, and this is part of the series of the CIPM-MRA document series. And this is specifically guidelines for monitoring, reporting, quality management systems in the CIPM-MRA. And then on the right-hand side is a 2-page brochure that talks about the benefits of having a quality management system. Currently, the Quality System Task Force delegates are the following representatives: Fernando Kornblit from INTI Argentina, Daniela Aguilera from IB Metro in Bolivia, Orlando Martins from Metro Brazil, Isabel Amen from NRC Canada, Syra Knox from CARICOM, Rodrigo Ramos from Chile, the UDEC, Milena Rodriguez from Colombia, the INM, and Gabriel Molina from LCM LACOMET in Costa Rica, Fernanda Basantes from Ecuador, INEN, Sophia Lawrence from BSJ and Jamaica, Alfredo Aleas from CENAM in Mexico, Lourdes Gonzalez from CENAMEP in AIP, and Lourdes Valenzuela from INTN in Paraguay, Edwin Guillon from the INICAL in Peru, Catherine Cooksey from NIST USA, and Elizabeth Vieira from LATU in Uruguay. And then for the leadership, we have myself as the chair, and I am a quality manager at NIST in the United States. Andrew Kahn is the secretariat. He is in the International Affairs Office at NIST in USA, and Isabel Amen from NRC Canada is the quality head there, and she serves as the deputy chair for the QSTF. All of us work together, and it's been really great having all these colleagues that are very knowledgeable of quality systems. I would say all of us are subject matter experts, and we're here to help anything that you need regarding quality throughout the region. Are there any questions?
Hi, Sally. This is Andrew. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, so I think, or excuse me, in the Q&A channel. So I think we can move on to the next presentation.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. So I'm Isabelle Amen. I'm the Deputy Chair of SIM-QSTF and also from NRC Canada. I will present to you an introduction to the SIM-QSTF documentation. And if you have any questions, as mentioned, please indicate them in the Q&A section. So this is, in my presentation, I will describe first the structure of our documentation, where it can be found and how it is approved. I will then present you an overview of these documents. For the last point, I will focus more on some documents, like 3 of them, as some others will be presented or explained in the presentations in the following session of this seminar. In the SIM QSTF documentation structure, so that's it on this slide. As explained by Sally before, SIM 09 is the governing document describing our mandate given by SIM and the rules of order. Then QSTF works with a series of documents that we call the QSTF series of documents, as well as a few guidance documents. So where can they be found? Where are they published? They are published on the external website of SIM at this address, and you will find the documents on the SIM QSTF page by following this path. About SIM, structure, and then click Quality System Task Force QSTF. This will bring you to the QSTF page. So you scroll down a little bit and you will see this. You will see first a general information about SIM QSTF, and then the documents, then other useful information about QSTF, as well as the SIM QSTF leadership contact information at the very bottom of that page. As SIM QSTF has transitioned very recently in the recent years from a NIST hosted web page to the official SIM website that you see here on this screen, but more recently also from a NIST hosted SharePoint to a very recently launched SIM SharePoint, you may find reference to the QSTF documents in various locations on the internet due to this transition. However, in case of doubt, the only official publication site is the external SIM website shown here. Documentation is published here so that it's also available to SIM institutes and designated institutes that are not part of the 16 QSTF delegates member and therefore do not have access to the SIM SharePoint. The QSTF documents are uploaded on this page by the SIM QSTF secretary once they have been approved. So as you scroll down the QSTF webpage, you will find the documents. First, you will notice that the SIM 09 is there and a series of QSTF documents that are used by the SIM QSTF. The SIM 09 has been copied here for convenience and quick reference from the official documents tab at the top of the SIM webpage, as it is officially published on that page, as it is a SIM document approved by SIM Council. So the SIM 09 was explained to you in the previous presentation by the QSTF chair, so I will not repeat it here. So coming back to the QSTF series of documents, there are 7 of them. Some are required. There are required tools such as QSTF-1 and QSTF-3. Some are optional, such as QSTF-2 and QSTF-4, which can be replaced by an equivalent or similar document or record as part of the submission to SIM QSTF. The use of QSTF-1 and 4 will be explained later on in the next session by Fernando and Milena. QSTF-5 is also optional because it may be used by institutes who may wish to extend their QMS recognition for improved CMC or extension of very similar CMCs in between 5-year presentations. So without waiting the next cycle of peer review or when the QMS is due for reapproval. I will explain that document later on in my presentation. Another document is QSTF-6. As you can see, it has been retired. The reason for this is that the transition to 17025 2017 and ISO 17034 2016 is now finalized at SIM. However, we keep this document as reference here so that it can be used in future for future transitions to the new versions of the conformance standards. And we will update this document as needed when this happens. The two other documents are QSTF-00 and QSTF-7. Those have the detailed procedures on how the QSTF works, so how we proceed as needed with electronic ballots within QSTF. Then you will find two guidance documents that have been issued in September 2020 by the SIM QSTF. The first one is a guide to prepare submissions. So this will be covered in very much detail in the subsequent sessions. So I will not cover this document in detail in my presentation. And the other one is a guidance regarding organizing remote peer reviews and assessment. This was introduced in 2020, early in the pandemic. I will not go through that document, but you should know that it's available here. So as a reminder, guidance documents are not requirements, but they're here to help institute for their submission and for performing, if needed, remote assessment and peer reviews. So it's important for institute to know that they exist if needed, and they have valuable information for you to consider. So I will explain later in my presentation the QSTF-00 in more detail, as well QSTF-5 and 7. The use of QSTF-1 to 4 will be explained in more details in the subsequent session. As you scroll down the website, you will notice that there are other information, including two key resolutions that concern QSTF. One is from the SIM Council in 2021 regarding virtual meetings, and one is from the JCRB from 2022. So they're on the webpage of SIM if you want to have a closer look to those resolutions. Finally, on this page, you will also find information about members, observers, confidentiality of the work we do, as well as, but not shown in this presentation, the history of SIM-QSTF. And as I mentioned, the contact information of the SIM-QSTF leadership is at the bottom of that page. So how are these documents approved? The QSTF series of documents are periodically reviewed and approved by the 16 delegates of the SIM QSTF, either during a meeting or by electronic vote. The guidance documents are developed as needed, and they're also approved by the delegates. To be noted, though, that editorial changes, though, may happen to those documents, and these editorial changes do not require formal approval or vote from the delegates. This could happen, for example, for the case when we simply update a reference to a CIP-MMRA document, for example, the change of nomenclature from CIP-MMRA D04 to CIP-MMRA J13, or simply correct some typographical errors. For SIM-09, it's also regularly reviewed and periodically updated by the QSTF members to reflect changing requirements on the QSTF that would be as a result of a SIM Council resolution, JCRB decisions, or other factors. But those changes are approved by the SIM Council, and they're presented to the General Assembly. I will now go over the QSTF series of documents and an overview of their content. QSTF-00, so contrary to the SIM-09, which covers the mandate given to QSTF by the SIM, this document reflects more the day-to-day operations of the SIM QSTF. So basically, it covers the timelines and how we work. It covers the requirements for peer reviews and assessment and the timelines on when these assessments need to happen. It covers the requirements for meetings and submissions and as well and the timelines for those. And it also covers the monitoring of approved QMS, how it's done and the timelines. and finally, the regular reapproval of QMS. I will not read the entire introduction of this document, but just highlight the 2 points already mentioned by Sally. For an institute signatory to the CIPM-MRA and that has declared CMCs or wants to declare CMC in the BIPM key comparison database, presentation to SIM-QSTF is required to support the claimed CMCs. But as explained by Sally just before, it is not limited to this purpose, and any institute in the SIM region may present a QMS related to the services for QSTF approval. In the scope of the document, again, it is reminded that it applies not only to the institute signatory to the CIPM-MRA, but to all SIM countries. It is also used by organizations that wish to obtain their QMS approval by SIM, such as the BIPM or other international intergovernmental organizations or their designated institute that are signatory to the CIPM-MRA. The scope of the work of QSTF so covers, of course, calibrations and measurement capabilities, reference material production and certification, as well as proficiency testing at services offered by institute in our region. The next section of that document covers peer reviews and assessment. You will notice that the title of that section mentions on-site peer review and assessment. There is, however, a footnote that was introduced during the pandemic where QSTF acknowledges the growing use of remote and hybrid peer review assessment. However, further adding that the technical portion of the peer review assessment may be better suited for in-person. In the footnote shown here, there is also a reference to the guidance document to conduct such reviews, and also an indication that the risk should be evaluated and presented to SIM-QSTF if this is the mode of assessment that was chosen for this presentation. In any case, what is important, regardless of the mode of assessment, whether it was in person, remote, or hybrid, approval by SIM-QSTF is never guaranteed. Also, it's important to note that the decision to proceed with either in-person, remote, or hybrid lies with the organization being evaluated. The SIM-QSTF leadership may be consulted for advice, however, they will neither endorse or reject such requests. Then in QSTF-00, still about peer reviews and assessment, it covers which applicable conformance standards are accepted, as well as an indication that the QMS conformance is either demonstrated based on self-declaration and peer reviews, or based on appropriate accreditation as stipulated in the CIPM-MRA text itself. Regarding accreditation, careful attention is needed for the type of assessment that is being presented to us. Accreditation bodies often have different types of visits, such as monitoring or surveillance visit, and those may not suffice for the purpose of QSTF. The reason is that they often lack the depth and breadth, and consequently do not provide necessary information for the QSTF on which to base their decision. It's therefore very important to present a full assessment or a full reassessment for the purpose of your presentation to SIM-QSTF. Then in that document, there is what we call the 18 months rule. This is how it's written. It's a little bit confusing at first when you read it, but I will attempt to explain that to you. As we do not know in advance when the actual dates of the midterm meeting or the sim week meeting will be in the future when we organize peer reviews or assessment, the QSTF applies this rule. The two reference points are March 1st and September 1st. So when a presentation is made to the QSTF at the midterm meeting, which usually happen between March and May, the peer review or assessment part of the package needs to have been done prior to and within 18 months of March 1st. If a presentation is done during the sim week, which usually happens in the span of September to November, then that assessment or peer review needs to have happened prior to and within 18 months of September 1st. In practice, what does it mean for this year? For the midterm meeting that will be in May 2024, this means that the peer review or assessment that is presented must have been done after September 1st, 2022. And for the sim week meeting in November 2024 this year, this means the peer review of us or assessment must have been done after March 1st, 2023. Then continuing on requirements for a peer review and assessment report, the content of the peer review report is mentioned in QSTF-00. Of course, it should cover the requirements of the conformance standard 17025, 34, or 43, and also cover the information specified in Appendix A of the CIPM-MRA G12, Quality Management in the CIPM-MRA, which is available on the BIPM website. So we have summarized also here key points that need to appear in this report. Then we cover requirements for the competence of the peer reviewer assessor in this clause 3.3. The important thing is that the reviewers meet the criteria detailed in Appendix A of the CIPM-MRA G12. It contains the required and desirable characteristic for the education and experience of the peer reviewers in the technical field relevant to the CMC that are being reviewed. So this is important when peer reviews or assessment are planned, then these criteria are met for the reviewers and assessors. The reviewers are external to the institute presenting the QMS. However, there is exceptions for very large NMIs. Those very large NMIs are pre-approved by SIM-QSTF, and they are actually listed in QSTF-00 in clause 3.5. Those large NMIs will have to demonstrate on a continuing basis the independence and the qualification of the internal reviewers that have been chosen. Today, only 3 NMIs have been pre-approved. In this case, these 3 NMIs are NIST, INMETRO, and INTI. In QSTF-00, then we talk about the meetings and submission requirements. So there are 2 cases. For a QMS that has not been previously approved by SIM-QSTF, so this means for an institute who comes to SIM-QSTF for the very first time, they are considered a new QMS. It could also be an institute who already came to QSTF to present a metrology area, but is wishing to present a very different area and the QMS in support of these very different capabilities. So these are also considered new. The timelines are described as such, so 8 weeks prior to the actual date of the meeting. So once we know the actual date of the meeting, the SIM secretary will send an announcement of the meeting, and this announcement will include the deadline for the submission, and usually also will include the draft agenda for that meeting. 6 weeks in advance of the meeting, the institute who's going to present needs to submit their documentation according to QSTF series of tools and documents that I already talked about previously. Institutes that do not have access to the SIM SharePoint to submit their documentation will submit them through their NMIs who have access to it or through the SIM Secretariat. But this will be explained later on in the next sessions of this seminar. Then 6 weeks later, the actual meeting is happening. And as I mentioned, the midterm session is usually between March to May, and the SIM week session is usually between September to November. For a QMS that has already been approved, it's very similar. However, the timeline to submit documentation is 4 weeks in advance of the actual meeting. So as I mentioned, there's usually 2 sessions during the year. And for their presentation, the Institute must clearly indicate which measurement service are being presented. So even though an institute may choose to present the QMS as a whole or in parts, and usually as an institute do that, they do that by parts, by specific measurement services, it needs to be indicated as part of the presentation. The language of submission also is imposed for some of documents. So some documents must be in English. This is the submission template, QSTF-1, and the checklist for submissions, QSTF-3. This being said, to help the SIM-QSTF delegate review, in the QSTF-1 and also in the guidance document, it is indicated that the peer review report or assessment report, as well as the resolution of the findings, should also be in English or a translation in English. Then in the submission, we require the name and biographies of the reviewers. This is for us to check that they meet the criteria established by the CIPM-MRA. There are in QSTF-0 special consideration for institute that will choose to present based on accreditation. So the first thing is important that the claim capabilities or CMC's uncertainty must not be smaller than the accredited uncertainty that appear on the scope of accreditation. The institute must indicate the name of the accreditation body and also the period that is covered by the accreditation, as well as the name and bios of the technical assessors who were involved in the assessment of the institute's capabilities. And finally, that accreditation body must operate according to 17011 and shall be a signatory to the ILAC-MRA. Next, in QSTF-00, there is a mention that a presentation must be made at a meeting of QSTF, and it must be made by a knowledgeable representative. When a designated institute presents to SIM-QSTF, it's a representative of the designated institute who presents, not the NMI of that country. For a QMS that is submitted for reapproval, to the SIM-QSTF, there is additional information that needs to be provided. This is something we call the evidence of vitality of the CMCs, and QSTF-0 lists things that should be considered as for that vitality, but this will be further explained by Fernando in the last session of this seminar. At the end of the day, with all this information provided with the submission, SIM-QSTF, the delegates, the 16 delegates in this group, must satisfy itself that the QMS is effective and conforms to the applicable requirements. That's our role. That's what we do during our meetings. If necessary, even though this is rare occasions, the QSTF may request additional peer review to be undertaken. Finally, in QSTF-00, so QSTF is also in charge of the monitoring of approved QMS, and the institutes are responsible to promptly notify the chair and secretariat of any major changes that affect its approved measurement services at any time during the year. If something happens that would affect the approval, then the institute needs to notify the SIM QSTF leadership. In addition to that, every year, an annual report is sent or submitted by each institute by July 31st of the following year. This is a new date. It used to be every January. It has changed this year to July 31st. You will notice that it's indicated in QSTF-00 that the template is available on the QSTF website. Well, it is not today because the template is currently in the process of revision to take into account recent JCRB requirements for RMO reporting. So once it's been completely revised, it will be published on the website. Designated institutes also need to provide this annual report, and they do provide it through their NMI. So it's their NMI who will send it on their behalf to the SIM QSTF leadership. Upon notification of those changes, so either being the chair, either through the year, being with a notification from an institute that there is something affecting their services, or by analyzing all the annual reports submitted, the chair can take appropriate action. Those are rare occasions, but this is possibility that can happen depending on the information that is being received. Finally, QSTF works, of course, a lot on reapproval of QMS and the vitality of published CMCs. So as mentioned previously, approved QMS must be reviewed and reapproved within 5 years. And reapprovals of a QMS, they have the same requirements as original approvals. So this requirement comes, so that this requirements comes from old JCRB, not old, but very long time ago issued resolutions from the JCRB. I will not read them here, but they're in the QSTF-00 if you want to read them more carefully. The reapprovals of QMS, so it's the same as a first approval, but it also requires evidence accumulated over the several years supporting the existence of a robust QMS. So when a reapproval is presented, the expectation is that the institute shows that the QMS has been working well since the last time it was presented to SIM QSTF. This could be evidence of regular internal audits, management reviews, feedback, management of non-conformities and risk, etc., and action plan to take actions when risk or non-conforming work is identified. Now, regarding QSTF 1 to 4, so I will not explain them in detail because Milena and especially Fernando will explain that later on. Some are used prior to the meeting and one actually is used during the meeting. Prior to the meeting, to prepare the submission, those two tools, templates, QSTF 1 and 3, are required. They're required because we want all the submissions to be standardized and contain the same information at the same place. So it's important to use the latest version of that QSTF 1 and 3 that you find on the SIM website. There is help to prepare the submissions, and it's available first in the instruction at the beginning of QSTF 1, and also in the guidelines for submission of information to the QSTF for the review of quality management system. This will be explained to you by Fernando later on. Another tool document that is used is the QSTF-4, is the findings log template. So the use of that template is optional and may be replaced by an equivalent record or document from the Institute's QMS, for example, the QMS action log, however named. QSTF-2, so as I explained, there is a requirement to make a presentation during the QSTF meeting. So QSTF-2 is a PowerPoint presentation template. It's optional. It may be replaced by an equivalent presentation format from the Institute, but that template gives you ideas of what should be presented during the meeting because it is a complement of your submission in the QSTF-1 and 3. I'm now going to go to the QSTF-5. So QSTF-5 is available, but maybe is not well known. So I'm going to present that to you. It's a process that has been put in place in 2014, but is rarely used. So the title of that document is requesting that the QSTF accept new CMCs as within the scope of a previously approved quality management system. It may be used by institutes who want to extend the QMS recognition before the next 5-year reapproval due date. It contains, so that QSTF-5 contains the policy and also a template checklist for that submission. This submission is reviewed and approved by electronic vote by SIM QSTF. And if it is approved, a letter of approval will be sent by the chair to the institute and to copy to the TC chair. And to be noted, however, that there will be no change in the expiry date of the recognition of the QMS in support of this area. So going into more details, what is the policy actually to use this process? So for new CMCs that were declared during a peer review assessment, it's okay. The list of CMCs in questions and the evidence that they were reviewed during an actual peer review and assessment is sufficient, and this is usually what is done. If, however, these new CMCs were not declared during the previous peer review or assessment for any reason, the Institute may provide the QSTF-5 template to the chair and secretariat to be reviewed by QSTF, but by email or through electronic vote. So an electronic vote will then happen to determine if these new CMCs are sufficiently close to the services covered by a previously approved QMS, and that approved QMS is still valid. And of course, that these CMCs are also covered by the same QMS. If this is not approved, so if the CMCs are not approved as within the scope of a previously approved QMS, that the Institute will just follow the existing procedures for approval of a new QMS covering the new CMCs, including a peer review and a presentation to the SIM QSTF. So this is roughly the template that needs to be submitted and what needs to be submitted, the list of the CMCs, when was the last reassessment, and then a written opinion of a technical expert concerning whether the proposed CMCs are sufficiently technically similar to those covered by an approved QMS, and also a statement from the Institute itself submitting that. You will notice here a reference to the required format pointing to CIPM MRA D04. This has been recently changed to CIPM's MRA G13. Finally, the last document I want to explain to you is QSTF-7, which is the SIM QSTF electronic ballots. This procedure is based on SIM-06, electronic voting within SIM, which is issued and reviewed and approved by the SIM Council. It mentions that we may apply or perform e-ballots by email or through a secure online forum, even though we've always used email so far. It applies to all electronic votes that SIM QSTF will take. It could be approval of documents. It could be approval electronically of a motion to approve a QMS. This has happened, or this could happen, that during a meeting, a conditional approval is given, subject at the condition that an additional evidence not submitted as part of the meeting, but available and existing. The motion at the meeting is to conditionally approve. And then after the meeting, once this additional evidence is provided, then there is an electronic vote that is taken by SIM QSTF. This electronic voting has been used also intensively for the transition to the new version of the standard 17034 and 17025, where many institutes were not due for their 5-year approval, but there was a requirement to show evidence that the transition had happened before June 2021. So many of these transitions were done through electronic ballots. Why do we have this procedure? But first is so that QSTF can take decisions between scheduled meetings and so that we have a fair and transparent decision making. That procedure covers first the initiation, so it indicates who can initiate such a ballot, and initiations needs to come with what is the issue we want to vote on and what is the proposed motion of the ballot. Then the information on which delegates are asked to vote on is shared. So if it's, for example, an update to a documentation, the document will be shared usually by email, but it could also be placed on the SIM SharePoint or other means. Then there is, if needed, a discussion period. That period of discussion is decided by the chair and secretary, usually 3 weeks, to give the time to QSTF delegate to look at this documentation, or look at the motion being addressed to them, for them to ask questions and discuss. And after that period, then an e-ballot is being launched. So it's either the chair or the secretary will call for the e-votes within a predetermined period, and usually it's within 1 week. So this is where the SIM QSTF delegate must provide their vote, either they are in favor, against, or abstain to this vote. The decision rules are established in SIM 06 apply with regard to quorum and decision making. The chair acts as a non-voting member, except in the case of a tied vote, when in this case the chair then can cast the deciding vote in accordance with SIM 09. All the records of these e-votes are kept by the SIM QSTF secretary. So thank you very much for listening to the general overview of the QSTF documentation. If we have time for any question, I will be happy to answer them, and please post them in the Q&A section of this seminar. And if we cannot answer them, we will answer them after the seminar in writing. You may also contact the SIM QSTF leadership, Sally, myself, and Andrew. Our coordinates are at the bottom of the SIM QSTF web page, where the address appears again at the bottom of this slide. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Isabel. We do have questions, and we have 10 minutes before the first scheduled break, so I think we should have sufficient time to answer these. Elizabeth, I'll go ahead and start with the first question. The second one is in Spanish. The first question is regarding the transition to, or maybe plans for the transition to 17043 2023, the latest version. The individual asks, as the proficiency testing is included in the QSTF scope, does the QSTF need to publish a transition plan procedure for ISO/IEC 17043 2023, similar to accreditation bodies?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Yes, of course, as we did for 17/025 or 17/034, we will have to do this. And the expectation is that we're going to discuss the policy and the timelines at the upcoming meeting in Costa Rica, because, well, yes, we will need to do that transition. So the standard was just published in 2023, so we still have some time, but it's coming very soon. So the QSTF-6 will probably be either updated or another document or amended to cover that specific transition.
Great, thank you. And Elizabeth,
Muchas
would you like
gracias,
to?
Isabel. Perdón, Andrew. Muchas
I
gracias.
apologize, Andrea. Thank you, Isabel. The second question is was made by Karen, and it says, could you please explain once again the 18-month period to present the quality management system? In the case of SIM in El Salvador, the peer evaluation, we had it on August 2023. So then the presentation, would we need to make it during the first meeting in the Q13? QS13?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I know this rule is a little bit confusing, because it says 18 months, so people think it's 18 months before the actual date of the SIM QSTF meeting. However, we don't know those dates in advance. So this is why we came up with this rule here. And the reference point is actually as if the midterm meeting would happen on March 1st. And so you take that date and you go backwards 18 months, and you need to have that assessment or peer review done within that 18 months. So if your assessment was done in August 2023, from what I understand from the question, it means you can either present at the upcoming meeting here, but you could still present at the Panama meeting in November. For the next mid-year meeting in 2025, according to that rule, you would be just before the September 1st deadline. In QSTF 00, it mentions that sometimes the QSTF chair may lift that requirement slightly. So if you are not ready to present for Panama meeting this year, maybe you could choose to present later. However, you will be slightly outside. So you will really need to talk to the SIM QSTF leadership to explain why you could not present a little bit earlier. And there may be good reason why you could not. And in this case, the chair may lift that for when it's a little bit outside of that 18 months rule. I hope this helps you.
Thanks, Isabel. The next question is, what options does the NMI or DI have if the quality management system is not approved by the QSTF?
This is an interesting question, and yes, this could happen. So what the options are? There are several of them. One of them could be to gray out the CMCs that are supported by that QMS. That's the first thing that could happen. Then depending on what was the reason for non-approval by the QSTF, maybe there would be a need to do an additional peer review or provide additional information. So it really depends on what happens. And so if this happens, the Institute will have like clear indication by the SIM QSTF committee about what is expected to have that QMS being considered as appropriate and demonstrated that it's robust QMS. So it really depends, but one of the possibilities, yes, is graying out the CMCs.
The next question here we have is, do the peer reviewers have to come from SIM?
No, not at all. The peer reviewers may come from all over the planet as long as they meet the requirement of the CIP-MMRA Appendix A, the CIP-MMRA G13. So they may come from any regions of the world.
Great. So that's all the questions I see. And
Okay.
we are 5 minutes just before
Mhm.
we're scheduled to take a break. So
Okay, excellent. Thank you very
Mhm.
much. And if there are further ones, we may answer them at the end of the seminar or in writing after the seminar. Thank you.
Bueno, vamos a pasar entonces al primer corte y retornamos a las
Okay, so we will go to our first break and we will come back at 17:30 my time. Okay, see you.
Welcome back, everyone, from the break. Should I begin?
Elizabeth, any remarks or anything? Okay, sounds like we're good.
Okay, well, welcome back. Again, I'm Sally Bruce, the chair of the SIM Quality System Task Force, and my next talk is going to be about the roles and of the responsibilities within the QSTF and our functions. I first wanted to start off with the role that I'm in, which is the QSTF chair, and the responsibility there is for the operation of the SIM Quality System Task Force. It's a non-voting member of QSTF, except in the rare instance of breaking a tie vote. The chair is also a member of the SIM Council and attends the SIM General Assembly and provides updates, usually through presentations to SIM Council and the SIM General Assembly. Certainly, the General Assembly is on an annual basis, and to the SIM Council as requested. They are also a member of the SIM delegation to the JCRB, the Joint Committee of the Regional Bodies. And there are typically 5 delegates from each region that go to the meetings. And it was decided last year, instead of having 2 meetings per year for the Joint Committee of the Regional Bodies, there are now 1. And the next meeting will be held in September at the BIPM. The QSTF chair serves a 3-year term and can serve a second term if reelected. I began serving in 2020, and I'm now in my second term. So the steps to become the QSTF chair, the NMI director would nominate a potential candidate of the QSTF chair from their NMI by sending a letter of support, and the chair's NMI has typically, just saying in the past, has provided the SIM secretariat role. The SIM QSTF secretariat role. I apologize for that. That's a typo. So let me be clear again. The role that Andrew is in right now as a SIM QSTF secretariat. That's the role I'm referring to. The SIM QSTF vote for the delegates vote for the candidate, and the outcome of that vote determines the recommendation by QSTF to SIM Council. Then SIM Council would then also vote, and then it would matriculate onto the ratification to the General Assembly. So it is a bit of a process, and I believe we would start that, in the General Assembly meeting. We would have those recommendations up to the general, in plenty of time for the General Assembly. So it wouldn't be this year coming, it's next year's. The profile of the QSTF deputy chair. I want to just say that since 2020, there has been a deputy chair of QSTF, and it's from a delegate that's serving, and they still serve as a delegate from their NMI. But it provides opportunities for the QSTF delegates to gain additional experience, and in particular can provide opportunity for continuity on the QSTF, and then, like I said, the experience and the information that they are exposed to. The deputy chair of the QSTF works with the chair and the secretariat for preparations of the meeting. They often look at the completeness of the submissions of the documentation, and for the review and compilation of the SIM QSTF annual report for the preparation of the JCRB report. They can serve as backup to the chair for the QSTF meetings if needed. And they provide over the QSTF when the chair's home NMI is making a presentation of a quality system. Assists with the updates of the QSTF documentation, policy, and procedures, and assists with training of and questions from the delegates. For the Secretariat of QSTF, provides coordination and assists the delegates with their logistics for the QSTF meetings. They develop the meeting agendas regarding the presentations, work with the coordinator of the meetings, which would be the host NMI representatives. They provide minutes of the QSTF meetings, and they can provide letters of invitation for the meetings when needed. Maintains information resources such as the SharePoint and the web pages, the SIM QSTF webpage in particular, and more. They are often a key person for the communications of the QSTF. So the meetings are open to all SIM members, representatives, and other regional metrology organization observers. And I know some of this information may be repeated, but we really do mean it. We are open for observers, and I think that's also a great opportunity for information exchange as well. Keep in mind that the information that's provided to the SIM QSTF delegates for the QSTF reviews from the NMIs is considered confidential. So after the presentation of the quality management system is given, though, there's opportunity for discussion, questions, and comments. So we ask that no photos are taken during the presentations of the QMS. And occasionally the chair may declare part of the meeting closed to discuss internal matters or policy. For the delegates, the membership is comprised of one voting delegate from each SIM member NMI, which is also the signatory to the CIPM-MRA. Each delegate represents their NMI as well as any designated institute associated with it. The quality management system of the DI must be presented to the QSTF by the DI itself. The SIM Quality System Task Force may be asked to review quality management system of an intergovernmental organization, which would be a signatory to the CIPM-MRA. Examples of these that we have reviewed quality systems from: the SIM Quality System Task Force has reviewed quality systems from the BIPM, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, which is a signatory through the World Meteorological Organization. The delegates are assigned by their NMI director to serve as a QSTF member. Up-to-date letters of appointments from the NMI directors are filed with the QSTF Secretariat. These letters can also assign an alternate delegate, and we strongly encourage you all to have an alternate, those of you that are delegates. Letters should identify a term or specifically indicate when, if the term ends, for example, when notified of a different person serving as delegate. And the responsibilities and participation: QSTF is responsible for reviewing and approving the quality management system of any SIM member or associate upon request, even the non-signatories of the MRA. The role of QSTF is to determine the conformance of the Metrology Institute's documentation of the quality management system within SIM to the CIPM-MRA documents, the JCRB resolutions pertaining to the MRA, and the conformance with the pertinent ISO standards that are used and implemented by the Metrology Institutes. I think it's important to mention that we are not a conformity assessment body, that we operate under the framework of the CIPM-MRA that's specifically for Metrology Institutes. And through these regional metrology organizations and the JCRB, that's how the MRA is implemented. The quality management system approval by SIM QSTF is required to support CMC claims. However, since it's not limited to this purpose, any NMI or DI in the SIM region may present their quality management system related to measurement services, their measurement services for QSTF approval. And I want to just mention it again, we really encourage you all to come to QSTF. It's possible that we can provide some feedback that you will find helpful in the development and the maturity of your quality management system. Again, the roles and participation, QSTF assesses whether the QMS is conformant with the requirements of the MRA per CIM 09, the ISO IEC 17025, or the ISO 17034. We also have a QSTF-00 document that also indicates that we will look at quality systems that are under this ISO IEC 17043 proficiency testing capabilities. A quorum of 50% of the QSTF members is required to conduct business. A motion and a second are needed to make a resolution, and the resolutions are approved by simple majority of the members voting either for or against that resolution. All QSTF members in attendance can vote on all motions, excluding the member representing a country or economy that is seeking approval. And the minutes of the QSTF are official records of the approval and will be made available to the representatives of CIM and archived for at least 10 years following approval. This is in one of our documents. However, practically, we have all the records that have been kept since the beginning of the QSTF. The annual reports that are written by the NMIs and DIs on the status of their quality management system, because we review these every 5 years, the annual report is needed in between to ensure the status of the vitality of the quality system. So what we want to know is, have there been any changes to the CMCs and the quality system that supports them? Any changes to the quality management system of the member institutes that could affect, such as changes in key personnel, management, their facilities or equipment, and other relevant information which indicate the vitality and the confidence, for example, training courses, workshops, participations, and comparisons. The CIM reports then the QMS status to the JCRB annually. All RMOs, all regional metrology organizations are required to report on the quality management system, review process, and the status of such reviews annually. The CIM report on the quality management systems to the JCRB provides the status of the QSTF approval of the quality management system for each NMI and DI, and includes their CMCs that are covered. The summary highlights any changes that affect the delivery of the CMCs. The chair is responsible for the RMO reporting of the approval status of the quality systems, supporting existing and proposed CMCs to the JCRB Executive Secretariat. And this is done, I report through the CIM Technical Committee Chair, as they are typically the head of the delegation to the JCRB. So there's a combined report that CIM has, and there's a portion of it regarding the quality management systems implementations from all the NMIs and DIs within CIM. Are there any questions?
Hi, Sally. This is Andrew. I don't see any new questions in the oh, possibly. Yes, forgive me. I just saw this question. Is a request for the review of the quality management system of a intergovernmental organization or DI are submitted directly by the IG or the intergovernmental organization DI directly or through the NMI? Excuse me, I fumbled the words there, but the individual is asking, should the DI or organization submit the request directly to the QSTF or work through their NMI representative? So
I would say that the first step would be to notify the Secretariat to QSTF, the chair and the deputy chair of the interest to having the quality management system reviewed. In all likelihood, if it's a DI, we would also encourage them then in the return correspondence to work with the NMI and also to make sure that they understand the procedures and the process. Similar to what we've gone over today in terms of all the documentation and how to use it, but certainly that partnership with the NMI QSTF member could likely help them prepare for their presentation. If it's an intergovernmental organization, they would do a similar thing where they would notify us at QSTF that their intention would be to have their quality system reviewed by SIM QSTF. And then we would work with them directly in terms of preparations that they would need. In all likelihood, Andrew would then ask them to send all their documentation. In all likelihood, Andrew would upload them to the SharePoint site because, again, only the delegates have access to that. So as I had mentioned about the DI working with the NMI, that is another thing that would have to occur. So it is really important that you work together.
Yeah, if I may, I'll just also add that we encourage the delegates to stay in close communication with their DI partners on communications coming from the QSTF. I think that's very important. We have another question from second question here. Can a DI nominate someone to be chair, or is it limited only to NMIs?
So I think the answer would be it depends, because there are, for example, with Chile in particular, they're all DIs as far as I recall. So it would go to the head member of that collaboration effective. But you know, I don't mean to be I believe that the answer, I want to double check, but I believe the answer is that it needs to be a member, a signatory of the CIPMMRA. And that's the way our delegates are determined. But there are certain instances, like I said, with the one country where they're all DIs, but there's all been named the one that's not primary, but is serving as the delegate. So.
Yeah, I would go back and reference the SIM bylaws for the exact language on this topic. I believe it is active members. DIs are not permitted to hold active membership. They are associate members, and so I think that affects the eligibility for the chair position on the QSTF. But I would encourage us to go back and look at the language in the bylaws. I don't see any other questions, so I think we can move on to the next presentation. Melania? Yeah, of course, Sally.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Buenas tardes para todos.
Good afternoon to all of our attendees. For those who don't know me, I am Nubia Rodriguez. I am from INM Colombia, and I am part of the Quality Task Force and Quality 2. Today, I have the opportunity to present this topic, which is how to prepare for QSTF meetings and how to review QSTF submissions to make an effective use of this documentation. The objective that we have for this presentation is to explore efficient strategies for preparing for QSTF meetings and review presentations of NMIs or DIs that will present their QMS before the QSTF. For their evaluation, we will discuss some key steps that work for some and the best practices to streamline the process and improve overall efficiency. To achieve this, Sally and Isabel have already given us introduction about the QSTF documentation introduction about the MRA and the QSTF documents that provide guidelines and some formats that include detailed information that we need to review throughout these meetings. So the first thing is to understand the QSTF meeting. What do we do? Like what was said before, the QSTF meetings are crucial for decision making and reviewing submissions. Understanding the purpose and expectations of these meetings is essential for the effective preparation and participation. So what is the purpose of these QSTF meetings? To ensure efficient and effective review of QMAs from NMIs, to ensure conformance with expectations and requirements of the CIP-MRA, and to serve other approval needs for QMS from the NMIs. It requires third-party reviews, and Isabel explained this. It requires on-site peer reviews, and there are other hybrid and virtual options. You can also request additional reviews to prove that they have the confidence and capacity to deliver the CMCs that they are claiming. What does the QSTF guarantee? Through the review process in these meetings, the QMS operated by the NMIs or DIs should be effective and conforms with the specific requirements of the MRA, including the requirements of 17.025 and 034, if applicable. What are the general steps for our meeting? First of all, the meeting, we review the agenda and understand the topics that will be presented throughout the meeting. It could be that an institute may present more than one QMS or a standard that they submit for the CMS approval. Second is document review, to consult the documented information from HNMI or DI that has been uploaded to SharePoint. Andrew will talk more about this as described in the QSTF-00 procedure for review and approval of QMS. The document describes the relevant information, the submission of data, dates, evaluation information. Next, we list questions or topics for discussion. Before the meeting, they should prepare themselves and make sure that they're ready to participate and to think about possible questions or discussion topics that may arise during the meeting. Because just in case there are no answers to these questions, and they should be prepared to address any matters. Review pending actions. If there are some pending actions from audits that are critical for the performance of the management system, make sure to review their status and prepare to inquire about updates if necessary. How to do the documentary review. So for this, we need to review documents after the deadline for uploading them to SharePoint. These should take between 8 to 6 weeks before the QSTF meeting. Where do we review the documents? Documents are uploaded to QSTF SharePoint by the QSTF secretary, and then they send us the information once the document is complete and available. Which documents are mandatory? As Isabel mentioned, QSTF-1 and QSTF-3. Those are formats that are compulsory and the rest are optional that NMIs may upload into SharePoint. What to review? Start by verifying the files that must contain minimum required documents like QSTF-3, the checklist to verify each one of the minimum requirements of documents that were received and where are they filed. Also, you can use a cross-reference from QSTF-3 to review internal audits and peer reviews or the accreditation body's report if applicable. Review the findings and impacts on CMCs. How many documents must be reviewed? It is important to look whether QSTF-1 provided the required information, given that it's a summary of the entire information from the QMS. And you can have an overview of what is being presented from each NMI's QMS. What documents provide guidelines? My colleagues have shared this before. The CIP-MMRA requirements and documents to identify compliance with those requirements. QSTF documents that Isabel mentioned to identify that they're complied with, and it's evidence through peer review. And QSTF-00 that provides guidelines for preparing all this documentation and review the approval of the QMS regarding measurement and calibration services, including the reference material production and proficiency testing that is being submitted by NMIs or DIs requesting the approval. Keys to review. Well, the first thing is to be very clear on deadlines for uploading the QMS documentation for each NMI, either renewal or first time. Check documentation for each QMS is uploaded and it's complete, and any other information from QSTF-00. Requirements to be fulfilled to take into account the requirements that must be met by documents required for the review, like peer review dates, reviewers' profiles, among other information required verification. Findings analysis to validate improvement plans or QSTF-4, which is also optional, and how to do an impact analysis and risk level identification for CMNs that are being submitted. QMS performance data, analyze data from peer reviews, audits, and internal audits, and any other information within this package. And take note, during the review, you may have certain questions that may rise from the documents that have been reviewed. What is reviewed in the documentation in QSTF, we have our QMS checklist. So for presenting the QMS for approval, you should provide all the information in QSTF-3, including the vitality evidence if it's a 5-year renewal. In the audit reports, as explained by Isabel, is that the QMS needs to be maintained and follow to follow all requirements of the evaluation. Conformity can be proven through peer review or declaration, and through the accreditation should not surpass 8 months for presenting QSTF, and the reviewers must be capable and comply with Annex A of CIP-MWG G12, which would be the guidelines for presenting or submitting reports.
The content on the review by peer reviews or the audits. So there are some examples that we might have on these reports, and it can be that they contain the reach of these review or the CMC tables which were evaluated, the different standards used, including the date of the review, to be sure that all of the standards and the requirements reviewed, the requirement of CIP-MWG and other that might be applicable. Important to evaluate the recommendations, conclusions that are taken from the results, the action plans, and if these plans were agreed with the reviewer. The conclusion of the review, according to the standards with the different requirements in the regulations that are appropriate to support the capacities or the capabilities or the CMCs that are provided to the customers, and that these can give the confidence so that they can be presented. The QSTF-4, it's very important that management of the findings is analyzed in the appointed institute or the National Metrology Institute, and the analysis of the causes for non-conformities found, especially those that might affect the validity of the results that were delivered or the CMCs. The impact assessment before risk management that is associated is also vital for this review, because it is up to these that there will be an approval for the quality management system. Well, a bit, and this is something that Fernando will explain later. This is our QSTF-3, and we have the checklist for the documents that need to be submitted. And in here, one of the important things is to consider the reference framework and the standard that we are presenting and the documentation that the NMI adds for the compliance to a management system. The second part or the second page that this list covers, and what's important or the most relevant thing to review here, it's the findings and the actions that must come in English derived from the peer evaluation and the internal audits, and the impact that the CMCs, the previous work that is associated to the findings, working according to the statistics or the different claims or other information. And for the 5-year renewal, and it's something Isabel already mentioned, is the evidence for vitality. Well, so the points to be considered for this document review is that in the audit report and the peer review, it is important to view the peer revision, that it covers the existing CMCs that we are presenting, the main conclusions or the findings of the audit or the peer review, the processes that have to do with compliance or that are a reason for concern or a non-compliance that might have affected. If the action plan or if the actions that are going to be addressed by these findings were agreed with the reviewer, and which were the conclusions from the evaluator or from the auditor. In these deeds from the review, that the policy is regularly reviewed and the objectives for quality, are they pertinent and are they still current? The key performance indicators that are used to measure the quality management system, if there is a regular assessment on the risks and if they are addressed in an effective way, if the training programs or the programs that are offered for metrologists and for the other members of the systems, if they guarantee the technical capability of the personnel and the requirements for the quality management system, and how is the feedback collected from the interested parties. In the action plan for the QSTF-4, which were the main issues that were identified during the internal audits, by the peer reviews and the management reviews, which type of non-conforming work were identified and how was it dealt with, and which impact did it have in the process and the results, which were the fundamental causes that were identified by the Institute for the problems and the non-conformities that which were found, if there was a real and thorough analysis to be able to determine why these problems occurred of these non-conformities, and if the realistic calendars or timelines were presented to implement the actions, and which will be the implementation of these actions and their impact. Very important, if there are still pending actions or audits that are still pending, to do a criticism for the quality management system. So we need to make sure and to review the status and be ready to ask the person that is presenting to have an update if it is necessary or if this is a reason of concern. Finally, we might determine if the quality management system is adequate And within the documentation, the system must demonstrate that it has completely documented and is updated, accessible, and clear at every level. Let's remember that the members of the QSTF need this documentation. They need the reports from the peer review that were made on site or in a hybrid way in order to be able to demonstrate and to be able to evaluate that they really fulfill or comply with the expectations. QSTF-1 is also a fundamental document which describes the reach, the objectives, and the organizational structure of NIMI, and the main processes and the different components of the management system. The structure and the equipment that must be adequate, the design of the work plan, illumination, ventilation, humidity, temperature, and the conditions that are necessary to preserve the different reference materials, items, or samples that can make sure that we can operate in an adequate way, the equipment or the measuring equipment analysis and the sampling tools, software management software, the procurement of data with any type of technology, and the management system. The risk management is important, and we should consider how it is identified and these risks, how are these risks evaluated and managed? And if there is an audit or a control, and the mitigation measures in order to reduce the probability and the impact of the risks that have been identified, and that obviously these controls must remain and be effective through time. The regulatory compliance, it's important to consider that we comply with external regulations, with external documents that are applied in the laboratory, and that it guarantees that the operations comply with these requirements, and that a monitoring system is established to verify their compliance. The follow-up activities to ensure the validity of the results. This is another key tool which we use in quality control and which is performed with internal verifications, with reference materials, with the calibrations, with measurements, and to participate in the different aptitude tests to demonstrate the feasibility or the trust on the different measurements that are made, and the competency of the laboratory, which has always to be able to identify areas for improvement. And this will always be for the improvement of the quality management system, changes in personnel and the technical competency, which is the most critical factor that the laboratories have, and this technical competency with the personnel, which is essential for the measurements, and that it provides this trust to be able that the personnel is qualified, trained, and it's updated to manage in an effective way the different changes in the personnel, and the laboratory can maintain a standard and a performance in compliance of the requirements that exist, and to have the improved methods, facilities, and other tools that the laboratory might have, and which are essential so that the management system is adequate and that it demonstrates a vitality on the system. So, not having anything else to say, I would like to thank you for your attention. And if you have a question, I am ready to answer. Thank you. Thank you very much, Milena. And I don't see any questions here in the chat. So we will go to our second break, and we're going to do this until 18:30 in our time. So we will meet again. Oh, no, but a question just popped up. Just let's see. Well, actually, it's two questions. Andrew?
Hi, yes, I'm here, Elizabeth. So I'll read the first one. How does one get the agreement of the peer reviewer with the action plan? One sends the table by email, for instance? Question mark.
I was not able to hear the question. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'll repeat it then. How does one get the agreement of the peer reviewer with the action plan. So I guess the communication with the peer reviewer, is that make sense? Maybe I'm
Ok,
not.
si entiendo, ¿cómo se
Okay, if
acuerda?
I understand correctly, how do we agree on an action plan or the actions that are going to be addressed to manage the findings? So let's say that QSTF or the persons who have been a long time, when we agree on a peer reviewer, we agree on the terms of reference in which the activities are going to be described. So one of these activities is to agree with him if really you want to agree with this with your peer on this plan. And what you do is that you carry out several previous actions or you formulate previous actions, and this person or the peer will give you an opinion as to whether these actions will solve the findings which were found. And so then the only thing, the answer is to agree with this person before the evaluation, and he will give you some guidance as to whether these actions, as a matter of fact, do close the finding. Thank you very much, Milena. And there's a second question in the chat box, which is made by Karen, and it says, in the case that INM has been accredited for 6 years, the magnitude, and do you want to present a quality management system that supports the CMCs based on accreditation? Should all the findings be presented both for the internal audits and from the accreditation body during the year of the accreditation? Okay, so this is the last accreditation or the accreditation which is going to be presented, in which we have mentioned several times that it cannot be over 18 months, and the internal audit or these both internal audits or the last internal audit preferably will be the one which will be presented. Well, and there is a third question, which says, which are the consequences if an MI cannot achieve for the QSTF to review the quality management system within the 5-year term? Well, within the rules of SIM, I do remember that one is like it is notified, the QSTF with the JCRV and need to report every 5 years. And obviously, if you haven't presented this, this might open the floor so that you can have the suspension to have new publications, or it is advisable that you can communicate with the president for a SIM and tell the president the reasons or the motives why you haven't been able to make this presentation or the obstacles or barriers, to see if maybe you can have an extension on the term. But the idea is to always fulfill the term when you need to have this renewal before the 5 years. Very well. Thank you very much, Milena. And I think that you were able to answer these. So now I don't see any other questions. So we are going to go to our break until the well, 18:30 our time, and then we'll go to session 3 with Fernando. We'll see you later.
Hi, Elizabeth. I see that we're at 18:30. Shall we begin with Fernanda's presentation?
Muy bien, muchas gracias, Andrew, Elizabeth. Buenas tardes a todos.
Thank you, Andrew, Elizabeth. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, the idea of this presentation is to share with you some tips and suggestions on how to create the package with documentation. What are the important items when you're preparing the documentation for QSTF review? And why is it necessary to have some of the documents? And what to keep present and that needs to be included and how? And on the other hand, how to deliver the presentation in an effective manner during the QSTF meetings. To a certain extent, well, after several years of participating in QSTF, you see certain important things, some experiences. So the idea behind this presentation is to share these experiences with you. Before I continue, can you hear me properly? I just want to verify this before we continue.
Gracias, Elizabeth. Bueno,
Thank you. Okay. First of all, with previous presentations from Sally and Isabel, I believe it's clear what is the purpose, the objective, the reason why we have QSTF. Basically, to answer to this question, we can go to the base document for QSTF, which will be SIM09. SIM09 explains what is the purpose of QSTF. It's responsible for reviewing and approving the quality management system of any SIM member or associate upon request. So based on this, we have another question that comes about from this, really. What does review mean? To review QMS, because, well, let's say we've had peer reviews, we've had accreditation, CMCs are technically reviewed by technical groups from different regions. So in addition to all of that, why do we need to have the QSTF review? So the question, what does it mean in this context to review the QMS system? So if anybody wishes to share a possible answer in Q&A, you're more than welcome. 10 seconds to see if anybody wishes to share an answer based on what you heard previously or based on what are your thoughts. So it would be good for you to think about it and then we will discuss this. How about it?
bueno, no hay hasta ahora respuestas.
No answers. Certainly you're still thinking about the answer, but what does review mean? What is reviewing a QMS? And to answer that question, let's go to a QSTF-00. It states that QSTF must satisfy itself that through its review process, the QMS operated by the Institute is effective and conforms to the applicable requirements. Okay, so over there, Lauren said to review that the information is relevant and current. Good answer. And then I have a third last question. What does it mean for the system to be effective? Effective means that it complies with its own objectives that are duly documented. And what does it mean to conform to applicable requirements? Diana says to review, it's to verify that the implemented system complies with the reference international standards. Well, yes, it's related to this. Third question would be, what are the applicable requirements? Can anybody share what these requirements are? 10 seconds. And then we will answer it in general for everyone. Very well. For me, I'll share what are the applicable requirements. Basically, applicable requirements are divided in three categories. On one hand, the reference standards that were mentioned. These three standards that you see up on the screen, 17025 for measurement and calibration services, 034 for reference material production, and 17043 for applicability tests, reference standards. On the other hand, the procedure of CIVPM, MRAG 12, and to monitor and report the quality systems under the context of the MRA. Many of the SIM procedures are based on this MRA procedure. And as with other documents that were mentioned here, they are all available online. And on the other hand, the documents of SIM and QSTF, SIM 09, QSTF 00, and we've heard a lot about them. And now we're going to talk about QSTF or the forms, QSTF 1, 3, and 4, and this will be the rest of the session. We've seen this already. Specifically now, we're going to look into detail on QSTF-1, the submission template, which is mandatory, QSTF-3 checklist that states that all documents, what file you can find each one, and the action plan. It's not mandatory, but some type of action plan must exist. Okay, before I forget. QSTF-1 has this structure. This table of contents has 5 chapters here. Chapter 1 talks about the QMS structure. Chapter 2 of implementing the day-to-day implementation of the system and some events that are necessary to prove that the system operates properly. Chapter 3 on assessments that QMS receives, internal audits, external audits, management reviews. Chapter 4 would be evidence of vitality, and Isabel mentioned these, and it has some appendixes for chapter 5. Then we will delve deeper into one of these chapters. Let's start with chapter 1. Basically, what you expect to see is that it is always recommended, in addition to looking at the framework of QMS, the delegates should present any documentation. I always recommend to go and look for all presentations and to see what they included in the QSTF-1, what other colleagues submitted for their presentation in the past, to just have an idea on how to do this, how to fill it out. QSTF-1, Chapter 1 includes what you must include, like the system's objectives, scope. When we talk about scope, we need to be very careful. Of course, the QMS needs to have a documented scope. That's a requirement from the standards. But in addition to that, it's not necessarily something that I'm going to present, like the entire QMS for all the institutes systems. Today, I'm just going to present the QMS for force and chemistry. So it is important to define just the specific scope for what is related to the specific presentation during this meeting. Policies, roles, and responsibilities, documentation structure, quality manual, a documentation chart, process map, eventually list of procedures, technical and admin, not the full procedure, but just the list and the titles on how confidentialities managed, risk-based approach, the organization chart, who is the person responsible for quality, the head of laboratory, etc., and all relevant changes in case it's a system that was approved 5 years ago. Of all of this, what is the most important why? Well, basically, it's trying to describe the design and structure of the system itself, objectives, requirements, policies, processes, and main procedures, and above all, to show the commitment to the fulfillment of those policies and objectives. Of course, it's not just to put the quality manual in chapter 1. It's just to put a summary that is enough and adequate that shows reviewers how the system works, what is the shape and structure of the system. I took the time of reviewing each one of the chapters for the last meeting's presentation that was held in Paraguay last year in general. In all those presentations, chapter 1 has between 15 and 20 pages. It's not a requirement that you have to have at least 50 pages, but no, it's just a guideline on the level of depth that you need to describe the system. Then you have chapter 2. Chapter 2 tries to show different events of the system itself, like customer feedback, complaints, non-conforming work, corrective actions, risk management, opportunities, improvement actions. Each one of that, what we're asking is concepts, like first describe the process itself, the corresponding process, and then show some records of the past period. Could be the last year, the last 2 years, you define that. Why is it important to show all of this? Well, there is a very known phrase that says, you find your true friends in difficult times. Your true friends are those who help you when you're going through hardship. So, problems show how good quality systems are. If customers are satisfied, there are not that many nonconformities, so the system is operating well. But what defines whether the system is robust is how that system operates whenever there are any nonconformities, complaints, and issues. And that's what we want to see here. So one of those several years ago, a person presented their quality system and they didn't have any statistics on complaints. So at that moment I asked, why didn't you share any complaints? And he said, well, with a lot of satisfaction, it's because we don't have any complaints. But how long have you been operating your system? 10 years now. And how many services per year? And around 500 services per year. Okay. I don't remember the numbers, but they were assumptions. If X amount of years and X amount of services, you never had a complaint? Is it either because you work perfectly or because you have a very poor complaint system? So you need to show that you have a really good complaint system, that you have a good nonconformity system. In other words,
Confianza a los delegados.
presentation need to grant trust to the delegates who are vote on that. It has to show that the system is reliable, to show that it's alive, that it works properly, and that it's an adequate support for your activities and services, and that it operates in an ongoing manner, that requirements are complied with constantly. So that's what chapter 2 deals with. In the last presentations of chapter 2, they have usually between 2 and 3 pages. Perhaps some of the information linked with these items could be in separate documents. For instance, we can present an Excel spreadsheet with answers from the last survey to customers, or a worksheet from the last complaints, you don't need to put each and every complaint, but just the statistic. And that information can be in a separate document. But in the main document of this presentation in general, or this chapter in general, in the last meeting that I saw these presentations, we had like 5 pages for this chapter in their submission. Chapter 3, management reviews, the system reviews by management. I want to clarify here.
Alteré el
And then I
orden.
explain why I changed the order of the template. First of all, in chapter 3 with internal audits, that I move into it later. But when you build a template, just try to follow the proper order from the table of content. But I'm going to talk more about the management reviews. This is a requirement that you need to have frequently, once a year, or any other frequency. The system needs to be reviewed by the institute's management. Some institutes hold a review meeting once or twice a year. Others have shorter meetings once a month. Everybody chooses the frequency, but the idea is to show what the process is behind management reviews and the information of the last cycle. What would be the last cycle? The last cycle would be the number of meetings where you discussed all the topics required by reference standards. And for the last cycle, the idea is to inform dates of the review, who participated, what were the inputs that were considered topics treated, minutes, findings, actions agreed to solve those findings, and follow up.
La 17.034
17034 requires a documented procedure for management reviews. The other standards do not require a procedure, but to do at least a management review. And what is important thing about that? What is it that we need to achieve by having this chapter 3? Basically, the information needs to show evidence that management is committed to maintaining and improving the system. If we are able to prove that or show that, or give the reviewer the idea that management is committed with maintaining the system, you have done a lot. The other thing would be the results of the review. They need to be consistent with the rest of the submitted information. For instance, if during the customer service, there are a lot of unsatisfied customers because they didn't meet lead times for calibration, well, that needs to be included in the management review and to a certain extent needs to be solved. So that's not a presentations issue, but it's a systems problem. So in the review by management, they did not look into that. When you build up the presentation, it's too late to do that. But oftentimes delegates are the ones responsible of quality managers of institutes. So in that double role, delegates need to take into account that management review needs to review and check everything about the system.
El otro punto, quizás lo más importante
Maybe
de
the
todo,
most important of the entire presentation is related to peer review or assessment, the accreditation assessment also. So what is contained in this slide, Isabel already mentioned what are the requirements for QSTF-00 regarding peer review. But what I am going to share with you would be what information needs to be added or included in the presentation on the peer review. Basically, 3 things. Peer evaluators, as Milena said, peer reviewers are the eyes of QSTF. QSTF cannot go to each of the institutes to see how the system works. That's why we use what the assessors saw and observed. And for that, we need to make sure that they know how to see and observe that they are capable in the proficiency of the assessor as well as their autonomy. Last year, I was told about an INTI case. They were missing the independence assessment. This could be the organization chart and say that the lab is right here to the right and the assessor is way in the left of the organization and the management chains do not overlap or cross. So regarding proficiency, I believe we need to have certain common sense. A story that I remember, say, several years ago, we received the chemistry capabilities and we got from the Netherlands by that time. It was the chair of the CCQM for chemistry. So in the closing meeting, I asked him to please send their CV to include it in this documentation. And he didn't like that. He got upset and said, look, in SIM, they don't know me. And then, of course, he sent me his CV. But what I'm trying to say is that they cannot have double role. You don't need to have a bio with all detail if it's somebody who's renowned. Maybe in that case, the biography could be just one line, CCQM chair, and that's it. Each one assess how they want to build the bio for their reviewer. To assess the management system, we ask the QSTF delegates to evaluate it. If I receive as a reviewer, for instance, Elizabeth from Latu, okay, all delegates know her. So it's not necessary to have her biography, but it depends on how you're going to build up that documentation. And the second element is, what did they see? What did the reviewer observe? That is registered or captured in the peer review report. A couple of years ago, between 3 delegates, we had links with Senam, Silvio Santos from Inmetro, and we built a guide on what type of information needs to be included in this peer review report. Basically, let me share with you. When I need to review a system from another institute, in those 4-6 weeks that I have to do this, the first thing that I look is a peer review report. I believe that I rather start there. If the report I see that is more or less okay, then I feel more comfortable with the rest. And from that report, I start to see the 3 main things that are highlighted here. First of all, the scope of the peer review and the requirements of the reference standards and what area was the lab assessed on. Say it could be scope, chapter 6, 7 of 17 or 25 in the force lab, for instance. Oftentimes, well, there's a team of evaluators comprised by a technical reviewer and a management reviewer, and they agree to issue just one single report, but oftentimes they don't do that. Perhaps we ask one reviewer to look at the management system and another reviewer to look at, well, they come from a different institute, they go on a different time to look at the force capability, and a third reviewer to look at the electricity capabilities and then build a presentation with all of that. So in that case, reviewers don't even communicate among themselves, and it's a responsibility of the institute itself, of the quality manager for that institute, to make sure that there are no gaps from that standard, that all standard requirements in all areas that have been presented have been assessed by one competent reviewer. And that needs to be clearly shown in the scope chapter for the report. This is on one hand. On the other hand, it's always convenient. Milena spoke about the TDRs. like audit plans, assessment plans, how long did it take, what staff members were interviewed, what documents were reviewed, what trials were done, tests were done. I don't know, for instance, if I receive an evaluation for the electricity labs, and in the scope tells me that they evaluated the AC, high radio frequency, capacity, time and frequency in the management system, and that assessment reached 2 days later. I don't think in 2 days they could have issued a report or evaluate all of that. So you need to see the evaluation plan and times. If that peer review was remote, did they consider the information that guidelines suggest? That Isabel mentioned, for instance, some information on communications, how it was done, if there was some communication difficulty, etc. And then we have the heart of the report, which would be findings. It is important to clarify whether it's a nonconformity or is just an opportunity for improvement or a recommendation. And if it's a nonconformity, why is it a nonconformity? What is the requirement that is not being met? Oftentimes, reviewers, specifically technical reviewers, don't feel like they're a bit lazy to look for the standard to see what was required 7.3.2. So, but it's important that when you do an action plan to include that reference. There is not a single criterion to classify nonconformity. Some reviewers prefer to separate between critical nonconformity and uncritical or minor. Others simply write down nonconformity. Some prefer recommendations, other improvement opportunities. So you agree that between the parties. But it is important that in the report itself, you define the classification of nonconformities and then the explanation from any opinion difference that you may have among the parties. And the most important, and perhaps the most important of all, conclusions about the fact that the system agrees with the norm or standard and can support the CMCs or capabilities. If the reviewer, expert reviewer states that the system has the capacity to support their capabilities, then half the work has been done. Or perhaps they may say, look, as nonconformities are being solved, then they will have the capacity to support that. But some short conclusion that states the general performance of the system, that is very important to have. And then reference to reviewed CMCs, of course. The third one, once the reviewer issues their report, what does the institute do with that report? That's what we call the action plan. It's a response to all findings, specifically nonconformities. And for that, we recommend you use the QSTF-04 format, or as Isabel said in her presentation, something similar to the QSTF format. So this is a proposal or a possibility that I share to have some additional information, more than just the document that is in the website, a reference to each finding. What you have in blue here, would be what the reviewer sees, what you transcribe from the report, the number of finding, the description of the finding, if it corresponds to the evidence, the type of finding, the standard reference, and what you see in green, the answer of the institute to that.
Análisis de causa,
If there's a cause analysis, a corrective action, or a correction responsible, and the date for this corrective action or the action proposed, and the impact on the MC and the status, whether this finding has been solved or if it hasn't yet been solved, and which is the status. For those of you who have a little bit further experience as to accreditations, there are two basic differences amongst the accreditations and the review for the QSTF. And which are they? For the QSTF, not all the nonconformities must be solved and clear and verified before the presentation. As you know that the accreditation for the accreditation body, in order for it to credit that laboratory, all of the nonconformities must be perfectly cleared and verified. And on the other hand, the accreditation requires that the reviewer, the evaluator, responds as to whether all those are the correct or right actions to make this evaluation and the evidence that the actions are the right ones. In the case, it is not necessary, for example, and if I remember, there's a question from Karen, if you need to find an agreement with the evaluator, and it's not necessary in general to have the agreement of the evaluator. In some cases, it might be convenient. Why? Because there might be a non-conformity that is very complete on a very complex technical issue. So then it is necessary to send this proposed action to the evaluator. The evaluator can give his or her opinion and accompany the note giving this opinion. So why do you think that the QSTF doesn't exist, or it doesn't include solving nonconformities or to providing a feedback from the evaluator, unlike the accreditation bodies? Why is it not necessary for us? Do you have an answer as to why, or do you think a reason as to why? Which is the difference between a metrology institute and an accredited laboratory, for example? Well, basically, what we prefer as a work policy, it's that the quality system for the institute can provide us or give us this trust. So this is what tell the speaker needs to generate this trust or this reliance on the quality system. And if we trust our quality system, then we as QSTF, we are supposing that the quality system is going to be able to manage all of these non-conformities, and that the actions or the what would be the way to correct the actions for these nonconformities. So then we place all of our trust in the quality system, as long as the quality system is one that we can trust. And the quality system of the institute is the one that is going to be in charge of managing these nonconformities eventually. Of course, if, for example, I present a quality system with a peer evaluation, which was made a year ago, and a year ago, there was 10 nonconformities that were critical, and these 10 critical nonconformities, I still haven't cleared any of them, then they're going to tell me, no, 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 wait for a minute. You should clear some of them, and then you should present again in the next 6 months. But if from 10 we send you 7 and there's 3 in process, then it can still be approved. The quality system can be approved. So it all depends, let me insist, on how trustworthy the system is for the persons who need to vote. And this is the work mostly of the presenter or the speaker, to be able to obtain this trust in the system. Okay, let's continue. So internal audits, and I left this for the end. Let me tell you simply that a robust system of internal audits is essential to be able to ensure that the objectives are fulfilled, and that the internal audits cannot be replaced by peer evaluations, but rather these are two things that complement each other. Sometimes there are presentations where they show that internal audits are made once every 5 years in between 2 peer evaluations. To me, that is not satisfying because or I don't find that satisfactory, because in general, on one, why is it that I think in this way? Because peer evaluations, when we receive an expert from another institute, they always have very little time. So no matter how we program it for 1 week, and sometimes the discussions are long and the evaluator has a plane ticket to fly back home, and maybe the person will not have time to see all, but the internal audit is in the next lab, and if he doesn't or she doesn't finish this week, the person might continue next week. And internal audits are used to improve the efficiency of the process. When I arrive as a peer evaluator to another institute and I find a nonconformity, but I see that in the last internal audit this was found, then I'm at ease because I see that the system works. But when I see that there are important nonconformities in and the internal audits didn't detect or didn't find them, then I think that we should take a little bit more time to evaluate the different aspects. Even though a peer evaluator might be an expert in some area of metrology, it is important to make a better use of time with this technical expert to discuss technical issues that are relevant, the different uncertainties, traceability, the different measurements, etc., and that we do not dedicate as much time to evaluate. But for example, if the certificate there is a signature missing or a date is missing, or if the signature, because all of these things can be done by internal auditors. But in here, I'm talking about improving the efficiency. But of course, the peer evaluator needs to, or we need to demonstrate all of these systems which were seen by the internal audits. And in here, I will show you the reports, etc. So this person will dedicate time to things that really are more relevant, have more technically relevant. And the internal audits, what's important in order to present? So then, as usual, at least the processes, the audit procedures, the responsibilities in the internal audit process, including the finding management of these findings. And in these last years, it is not necessary to show all of the audit reports for the last years. I think I saw a question in the previous presentation about this. Should I show all the reports? And it might not be necessary, but it it could be a good thing to show the audit programs to see how many times the program has been, the laboratory has been audited in last years, and to see in the last cycles information about internal audits, which is necessary. Basically, the information is the same than that of peer evaluations or peer reviews. This is why I left this at the end, because we see that which is necessary information in the peer evaluation, and in internal audits, it's basically the same information. Sometimes the level of formality is not the same in an internal audit that in an external, but the amount or the quantity of the information is the same. It might be that some of the information might be more summarized, but it's the same number of items that are presented. Okay, so let's go to the next chapter and next point, which has to do with vitality of the CMCs for approvals or re-evaluations once the system has already been approved 5 years before. So let's remember how the system works, which is the process according to this mutual knowledge. When an institute requests to have a new publication of CMCs, these are organized technically by the different regional metrology organizations. But after these, I can have CMCs have been approved and published 20 years ago. And in 20 years, if there are no improvements or changes, nobody is going to change the CMC. The only periodical review that is made every 5 years is their review of the quality system that is made by the quality forum or the quality group for each regional organization. And since there is no technical evaluation on this period, the QCF needs to request some evidence that the CMCs are alive. And what do I mean by alive? From this publication, that they continue to participate in development projects, in improvement projects, that the people have been receiving training. So there is no mandatory list of information that you can read, but there is a possible list of the different evidence, or it is convenient to write here that in here you are considering all of the documents, and it is not necessary to see each of the parts. And in this case, I would like to clarify something. Sometimes the speakers or presenters place too much or too technical information about the different measurement techniques or methods. So the people from QSTF are not trained to interpret specific technical issues on each area of metrology. We are not experts. We are quality experts, and maybe some people can come from the electrical or the chemical area, but as a group, we cannot interpret a lot of technical information. For example, we can say the institute participated in a comparison similar to the CMCs that you are presented, and it participated a few years ago, and the performance was good, or we can understand the concept of the INN, but nothing further than this. So really, when you include information about this, it is not necessary to include too many technical details. If it is necessary, we could make a consultation as to, for example, if the evidence is enough, or we could present this question to the working group. Very well. In chapter 5 of one of the things that is requested is in here, for example, the payroll and the approval certificate, or when they request a spreadsheet, so that it need to be to the presented CMCs, and the CMCs need to be the same that were evaluated by the peers. So let me tell you, many times the peer evaluator, even in an appendix of the report, writes down which is the CMC spreadsheet or the worksheet. And if it's not included, it needs to be included and it needs to have the format of the MRI of this document. And besides, if we go back to the comparison with the different accreditations, you know that in general, an accreditation certificate is accompanied, or it comes together to the scope of the accreditation. And the scope in this case, it's an internal document for the CMCs, for the worksheet of the CMC in the required format. Once it is been published in the Appendix C, well, in here there has a public status. Meanwhile, this spreadsheet or this worksheet it's internal. Then we have the cross-reference with the reference standard, and this is requested by the MRI document, and it's a document that should be included. So there's a cross-reference between the requirements of the standard and the documentation of this quality system. Isabel already mentioned about this QSTF and the checklist for documentation. In this document, you need to show in which file each one of the information is included and whether it is included or not. For example, the vitality, if it's a first approval, it shouldn't be included. So we write this in this format for the number 3, and in heading, we see what's important, everything that is on the list, to write down which is the scope of the evaluation and it was not mentioned that the QSTF issues a certificate of approval for the system. And even though it requires official validation, because the only official validation is the deeds for the QSTF, some institutes find it useful to have a certificate to show that the quality system was approved. And then in this document, the QSTF-3, we need to write down which is the scope. And this scope cannot just be anything, but it needs to be something that is linked to the service list, which is published by each one, and that is included on the web page. And so once we have all of the information, how do we organize this documentation so that it can be uploaded? And this is going to show us how we can work. But before, how do we upload this documentation? In your files, there is a main file where we include the QSTF-1, QSTF-3. How do we name these files? And there's a rule so that we can unify how we name the files. And it's that we write down first the name of the institution, which is the quality system, and which is the date. In here, we have 4 examples of the last meeting. For example, the CENAM QSTF-1 for electromagnetic measurements, the date in which it says document 1 for radio frequency, or LAT2 quality system, the date, and NRC Canada, and pressure documents and the date. These are different versions of this rule in order to name the documents. And then you need to write down 7 subfolders, and one that has to do with peer reviews, the other one for the CMC, the other for internal audits, the other for the review, management review, the other one for all of the different aspects of Chapter 2, corrective actions and the different opportunities, the other one for the biography of the internal and external evaluators, and the last one for the evidence of vitality evidence, just so that we can help so that the information can be found. And this was proposed, and it was proposed to organize all the information and everyone organized it in the same way. And just to close, in the meeting, when we arrive at the meeting, supposedly everyone has already had these 4 or 6 weeks to read the documentation. And even though, nevertheless, it is convenient that during the meeting to show a summary of all of this documentation. And there's a template, a PowerPoint template, which is called QSTF-2. I think Isabel mentioned it, but the question is, how short should the summary be, or how long should the summary be? And once we receive the agenda of the meeting and they tell me, for example, for your quality system, you will have 40 minutes. So I need to distribute these 30 minutes, and a rule, 3-by-1 rule would be the rule to apply, 30 minutes for the presentation and other 10 minutes for question, discussions, and voting. Sometimes the discussion can take longer, but in general, this is the proportion that is used. So if these 30 minutes, and that it depends on the amount of information in each one of the slides. But if you don't have a lot of information, that you can take 2 minutes per slide. So the PowerPoint presentation can have 20 slides, and this is what I need to work with. Another example, a little bit more complex. Let's say if I need to present the quality system for 3 different magnitudes or for 3 different areas, the strength, the volume, and electrochemistry, and they give me each 30 minutes for each area. So in general, what happens, and when I present the first of the areas, I need to present the general aspects of the quality system. And this is going to take a little bit longer, maybe 40 minutes. So then these 40 minutes in total, I have 20 slides and then 15 for the general aspects. Chapter 1 and 2, for example, another general aspects, and 5 for the specific area of force. And these 5, for example, can be to present the force laboratory in one of the slides, internal audit might be the other one, the peer evaluation the third one, the action plan in a fourth, and the vitality evidence in the fifth, or however you want to build it, but not longer than these. And the same for volume, once you get rid of force, then the general part of the system has been approved. So now I'm going to present the specific aspects for volume, which are going to be shorter, and the specific aspects for electrochemistry, which are also going to be shorter. In total, it took me 30 slides, so the equivalent to 90 minutes. And that's just a possibility. And well, the last, but now it's the last part. How do you think that the QSTF meetings are? If you have recently become a delegate for QSTF, what happens many times is that when you need to present some information, you usually become very nervous. And this is as natural as the most natural thing in the world. So I ask you, how do you think that the QSTF meetings are? Well, first of all, the meetings at the QSTF are not like this poor speaker who has everybody on top, forcing him and pushing her. That's not what they are. And I would like to clarify, so you shouldn't feel nervous. The QSTF, it's a collaborative group as any other SIM group, and it has a constructive spirit. So as far as or as much as possible, I know it's easy to say and sometimes it's not easy to achieve it, but let's try to be relaxed. Maybe there might be some relaxation technique that might be useful. And to finish, the language shouldn't be a problem. And I'm saying for those of us who don't speak English as it's not our mother tongue or native language, when I started to participate in the QSTF for a short time, I was taking some conversation courses in English and they were really helpful. But well, sometimes you might stumble with the language, and if it is not English is not your native language, but there is always something a caring soul that will help us translating the different or the hard aspects to transmit. For example, remember Javier, who was the president for SIM, and he was acting as this translator, as this aid for the person who was stumbling or having some trouble in several meetings. And there will always be somebody who is going to help you with the English part of it, but don't worry, or with idiomatic issues that we might have. And as a recommendation for those of us who speak Spanish or Portuguese also. And I think this was everything that I wanted to tell you, so thank you. Thank you very much, Fernando. We don't have questions here on the chat box, so we will go to Andrew.
Great, thanks, Elizabeth. Well, thank you all for joining us today. My name is Andrew Kahn. I have the pleasure of serving as the QSTF Secretary. And I'm just going to be very brief, give an overview of the Microsoft SharePoint site that we use to house all the documents that we've been discussing today ahead of presentations, and also other relevant records that are maintained by the QSTF. So as you heard from others today, QSTF-00 outlines procedures and policy or procedural processes for the QSTF. Section 4 defines the meeting and submission requirements. And you heard from Isabel earlier that for new quality management systems that have not received approval from the QSTF in the past, those documents need to be submitted to the Quality System Task Force 6 weeks in advance of a meeting. For those that are seeking the 5-year renewal, the requirement is that those be submitted 4 weeks in advance. I, as the QSTF Secretary, will notify delegates of a planned meeting a minimum of 8 weeks before. I typically try to share updates as soon as possible so that members can prepare. And delegates themselves will be expected to upload documents to the SharePoint site. However, if there's any technical issues that may serve as an obstacle, or DI might need assistance uploading records and the delegate can't do this on behalf of their partner institute, then I can assist with that. So we use it, like I said, we use a Microsoft SharePoint site. Delegates are provided account information that they'll use to create an account. The domain will be the same for all users. This you see there on the screenshot, the simmetro.onmicrosoft.com. Users will be required to set up a two-factor authentication using the Microsoft Authenticator app. And so once that process is complete, we will have you enter into the 365 environment. You'll navigate to the SharePoint app a couple ways. Once you're in the landing page, you'll see on the left-hand side, either through the apps button, you'll get to the SharePoint application, or by the top left in the window, the 3x3 grid, you can click that and access the SharePoint app. This will be the following page. You'll select the SIM QSTF site. That'll take you to the landing page or the home page for the QSTF. And on the left-hand side, you'll see the pages that we have here on the SharePoint site. And if you scroll down on the home page, you will come to where we will have you upload your documentation. So under the QSTF meeting documents, the document library, screenshot 1, you'll see the month, year, and location of an upcoming meeting. In that folder, we'll have you create a subfolder using your NMI or DI acronym and the CMC area covered by the quality management system. And then, most importantly, is the subfolders, the organization of the documentation that you'll have within your within the folder that you create for your NMI or DI. This is 7 subfolders. They follow the sort of the logic and structure of QSTF-1. So you'll see there in screenshot number 3, peer review, reports and action plans, reviewed CMCs, internal audits and action plans, management reviews, quality monitoring records, bios, vitality records that showcase the vitality of the laboratory, and followed by the required QSTF documents or additional optional documents that you may choose to use with your presentation. So just some very basic tips in using the SharePoint site. Avoid uploading files with lengthy names. So with the subfolders and additional folders within folders, documents can get quite long, and you might run into an issue where the file name is so long that the document isn't uploaded to SharePoint. Please don't use compressed formats. I know some of these packages get quite large, and it's understandable that we might want to use compressed files, but those become a problem for delegates as they're trying to access documents during the meeting. I'd also ask, once you've completed your upload, go back into the system and check and make sure that those records are in fact there. We occasionally have instances where a delegate has believed that they've uploaded all the records, and we ourselves try to do our best to review the records before we meet, but there's always instances where something is missed, and it's best to take some time to ensure that those records are there. As some final reminders, the access to the SharePoint site is limited to delegates only. And while we have alternate representatives participate in meetings in instances where the primary delegate is not available, the alternate will not have direct access to SharePoint. So they will need to work with their primary delegate or their counterpart to collect those records. Records are confidential. We discussed that earlier. So these records should only be used in one's capacity as a delegate to the QSTF and in fulfilling that role. And then delegates are expected to coordinate with their DI partners. So please share communications coming from the secretary or the chair or deputy chair with your DI partners. That's very, very helpful to them as we near meetings and presentations. I believe that's all I have to share. Again, on this subject, please reach out to me with any questions about SharePoint and preparing for meetings. Thank you all.
Sí, como dice Andrew,
As
no.
Andrew mentioned, We don't see any more questions regarding the presentations. Oh, we just got one right now in English, Andrew.
Sure. Yeah. So I see this, and the questions regarding Fernando's presentation. So in our submission, we had so referring to the individual presenting the question. In our submission, we had challenges of an assessor bios due to the new data protection regulations. Our accreditation body refused to release information on their assessors. So I think we can have others, presenters comment on this subject if you think that's appropriate.
Perdón, no me queda
My
claro.
apologies, but the question is not quite clear. The accreditation body didn't want to give information about the biography of the evaluator. Is that more or less the question?
Yes, I believe that's correct, Fernando.
I could jump in.
Es muy raro eso, que no sé si la primera vez que lo escucho, ¿por qué no? Porque no es información confidencial la biografía.
The buyers of these reviewers are not really confidential information, but I don't know if any other colleague wishes to chime in or has an opinion regarding this.
I recall the situation. So it was an assessor peer reviewer from Europe, and I believe the accreditation body said that they have a policy regarding personal information and not being able to release that information. It was a one and only time that I'm aware that this has ever happened. And honestly, I don't remember if it affected the outcome of that quality system review. So if the person posing the question could refresh my memory, I know it's been a while.
So it's, I believe this is from, I'll just say, from Sophia Lawrence and at BSJ.
Right. I don't remember the outcome of the presentation to SIM QSTF. Was it held up? I don't remember. I apologize.
I do remember, if I may, Sally, there was no consequences for the presentation. However, there were a few abstentions, more abstentions that we usually have during a vote at QSTF. So there are a few abstentions because we were missing that information.
And then that brings up a good topic. With going through all the presentations today, I realized that we did not address what happens when there's abstentions. So abstentions will lower the potential vote count overall. It actually has little to no effect of the outcome of whether the system would be approved or disapproved. It basically negates those votes so that the majority count lowers based on abstentions.
And also in that specific case, the Institute was asked to contact directly the persons. The accreditation body was refusing to provide these bios. And so the advice was to ask directly the person. But in this case, it was not received on time, so that's why there were a few abstentions during the QSTF meeting. But it didn't have a negative impact on the final approval. But it's that's why it's important to try to get this information as soon as possible to demonstrate that the reviewers meet the CIP-MMRA requirement, because it's one of the critical information that we need to check to have confidence that the peer review or the assessment was performed with someone who had the right competence to assess the capabilities.
En general, el trato entre un laboratorio y un organismo de
The relationship between a lab and an accreditation body, the lab needs to have the possibility to accept or not the evaluator. And that's why they need to know their background. That's why I believe it's rather odd that the accreditation body refused to share the lab, the bios of their reviewers.
Okay. I see one additional question here from our dear friend Alfredo from Mexico. Alfredo asks about changing or replacing documents and uploaded to the QSTF SharePoint site. I presume after the initial submission's already been completed. I would say that does occur from time to time. I would ask that any delegate that might update records or include additional documentation notify the chair and the secretary and the deputy chair of that change, and be prepared to answer any questions that might come up during the presentation to the delegates who may have reviewed documentation that was maybe initially submitted. Let's see. Any other questions? I don't see. I see another question in Spanish here from Karen.
Sí. Karen pregunta.
Karen is asking, just to verify, if you're not a delegate, do we send the information to Andrew? I'm assuming the entire information package here.
Yeah, so in El Salvador's case, as they don't have a seat at the QSTF, I would ask that, yes, in that case, yes, please contact me directly, and we will work together to have you ready for the upcoming meeting.
Bien.
Another question from Erlan.
Yes.
To the attestment of the competence of the assessor is not an obligation from the accreditation body, question mark. The accreditation body is also reviewed by the appropriate organization where this kind of issue should be assessed. So Erlan's some follow-on commentary on the issue of reviewers or assessors from accreditation bodies. So yeah, I think that's the general consensus, if I'm not mistaken. Isabel?
Yeah, maybe on this is, yes, as mentioned by Fernando, the assessed body. So if you are assessed by an accreditation body, you have the right to ask for who are going to be your assessors. And if you believe that the assessors that the accreditation body is going to use does not meet the requirement of the CIPM-MRF because you intend to present to SIM-QSTF, then you have the right to then speak to your accreditation body to indicate that unfortunately the assessor being proposed is not meeting the requirement for my purpose. So please provide me with another assessor. It's every accreditation body has this process. It's including in 17011 where during the planning of an assessment, an assessed, the conformity assessment body has the right to oppose or to have concerns about the assessment team that is proposed. It's part of 17 or 11. In the case that was described here is the accreditation body indicated a specific law about data protection, and they could not share the CVs like this. It could have been shared with maybe redacted information about confidentiality of that assessor, for example, not showing his home address or his email or phone number or age or number of kids they have. But everything about the competence of that accreditation assessor, we need to see that. So it's important that when an accreditation body is used for the assessment, that we have confidence that this assessor, it will meet the CIPM-MRA requirement.
Thank you, Isabel. Elizabeth, do you see
Sí,
the?
tenemos
Yeah.
una pregunta de Carlos
We
Acosta.
have a question from Carlos Acosta. To submit a quality system from an NMI, do you need to have a agreement signed with BIPM?
Si me permitís, Elizabeth.
If I may, Elizabeth, it will depend. That question. If it's a quality system that will be presented for CMC, the institute needs to be a signatory of the MRI. If it's a quality system that the institute wishes to approve independent from the CMC, so no agreement is required. They just need to be a full member of SIM or an associate of SIM. Correct. Then we have another one. What is the number of minimum votes required for approval?
No
Go
sé
ahead,
si esta
Andrew.
pregunta quizás, ahí va.
Okay, yes. So QSTF-00 defines this as any resolution requires a simple majority. So we have a 16-member body, so that would be 8 delegates voting in approval.
Andrew, there is other question. Yes.
So, oh yes, okay. So I'll read the question aloud here. So we have received feedback from SSDLs in various regions who are sent technical assessors who are not competent in the areas, even though the accreditation body in an ILAC signatory. So I'm not familiar with the acronym SSDLs, forgive me. Any of the other panelists do you happen to know? If we could have the
yeah, it's been added to the Q&A. It's a secondary standards
In the last
dosimetry lab.
comment,
thank you.
secondary standard dosimetry labs, SSDL. Si puedo responder esta pregunta o
If
este
I may
comentario.
answer this comment from Sakiti. The fact that the accreditation body is a signatory of ILAC, it's a necessary condition. However, it's not enough. Because just as with any accreditation body, they usually accredit labs. very few of those labs are national metrology institutes or designated institutes. Therefore, the requirement to assess institutes, national or designated, is above. It's a bit different than the requirement to assess any other lab. So you require the elements in Appendix A of the document that was mentioned. I don't know if this answers your question. I guess you did, because we don't have any further question regarding this one.
And I want to go back and correct myself. I think as I was responding to the question about voting, I did say I think I said 8 instead of 9 was what I could have said with the majority. So forgive me for that. I had my eye on the chat and misspoke. So my apologies for that.
Yeah, and I'll just add on that it's dependent on the number of delegates in attendance.
Right.
And as I mentioned earlier, if people abstain, it really does change the complexity of the total votes, because it's just they're not voting, so it doesn't it just really changes as well. So it's really dependent on the number of delegates who are there and participating.
The total number, yeah, of voting delegates. That's right. I apologize.
Yeah,
yes.
of real votes that are cast. Yeah.
And also maybe one thing that should be mentioned is that our meetings cannot run if we have less than 50% of the quorum to run. So if we have only 7 delegates in a meeting, then the meeting is cancelled. So we need absolutely at least 50% of the delegates, so at least 8% present in the meetings to hold the meeting. I think we didn't mention that during this seminar.
Confusing the two numbers, I think, the quorum and the votes on motions. So please excuse me for that. Oh, I see. Did we answer the last question from Karen in Spanish, Elizabeth? Oh no, we did. Okay.
There is a question from Alfredo again, Andrew.
Oh, I see that. Yes, thank you, Isabel. The question is there an open link or website, either at BIPM or SIM, where CMCs with a gray out status could be consulted? Do we need to be CMC writers to check that? Isabel, please, yes.
Yes, I will answer that, because I think I did ask for my own institute about that, and I unfortunately can't remember the exact answer, but I promise that I will provide an answer in writing for this. But I know there's a way to see that. I did ask the BIPM KCDB Secretariat about that, so I will get back to you, but in writing I can't right now know about this.
Thank you, Isabel.
I think there's another question in the chat, perhaps.
Oh, yes. Is there, so from Hector, a difference between the CIPM MRA and the ILAC MRA? Is that, am I interpreting that question correctly, Elizabeth?
I think so.
Is it, yeah.
You want to take that one, Sally?
Sí.
Yeah.
Okay.
Eso como
All
una
right.
aclaración.
Yeah, okay. I'm still trying
Yo
to...
lo entiendo como que es una respuesta a lo
I
anterior.
understand that this is just an additional answer to the previous question. There is a difference between the CIPM and the ILAC MRAs.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I missed the nuance there. So very good.
Do we want to articulate what the differences are, or are we okay?
I think we understand, right? Accreditation bodies and the mature, yeah,
Good.
so I think
Great.
we're good on that.
Yo creo que era un comentario, como que la
I believe
persona.
it was just an added
Mhm.
comment to clarify further the answer.
Just a comment, yes, very good.
Esperamos unos segunditos para ver si no aparece otra
Let's
pregunta.
wait a few seconds to see if any other questions come up.
As a reminder, put your questions in the Q&A field at the bottom of the screen. It's very difficult for us to monitor the chat, so you have to use the Q&A box.
Ujú. Estamos en tiempo todavía.
I think we're good on time. We've been very prompt.
Pero bueno, parece que no.
It seems as though there are no further questions.
Otras consultas. No sé si alguno de los
So I don't
panelistas
know if any of the panelists wishes to share a comment
cierre.
before we move to the closing of the event.
Bueno, entonces vamos
Very well.
a pasar al cierre.
So let's move on to
Bueno,
the end of the session. Personally,
estoy muy contenta.
I am quite pleased and happy because in addition that we were prompt and we fulfilled our goal, we have had excellent participation. We had almost 100 people participating throughout the seminar. We also had excellent interaction and participation throughout the sessions. So
Tuvimos la oportunidad de
we had the opportunity to exchange. Also, I wish to thank all participants for joining us in the seminar, for being interested in how we work in QSTF, but also I wish to thank all panelists and my colleagues from QSTF and Claudia as the SIM secretary, that we work together to organize all of this. And also I wish to thank the translation services and Enrique, who was also organizing the entire platform. And without further ado, warm greetings to all of you, and until next time.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Do not hesitate to contact us if you have any other questions.